Welcome back, Human Geography fans, or people that Mr. Radcliffe is forcing to watch this video. We're going to take some more notes on some more vocab, and this time, instead of just being about culture in general, now it's going to be about cultural interaction. And so my suggestion is just start a new section in your notes, continue on the same page as the last one even, probably, unless it makes sense to start a new one. And then you give it the date, call it cultural interaction vocab, and let's have some definitions. So one of the major things you're going to want to be aware of is cultural bias, which is when you judge another culture through the lens of your culture, and you presume that your culture's values and norms are universal to other cultures or should be universal to all cultures. So when you think your culture's value and norms are the best way to do it, that's known as ethnocentrism. And so I think this cartoon shows cultural bias in such a neat way where both people are judging the other person's culture, assuming they're correct. So whether everything's being covered but her eyes or nothing's being covered but her eyes, the other is assuming that they're part of this male-dominated culture where females have no agency, no control. And there might be some truth to either of those people or both of those people, but they're both judging the other as if like their culture doesn't have that, or that they're more free or liberated or empowered than the other culture. And there might be truth to it, right? I'm not saying that it's automatically wrong, but it's worth exploring and it's worth checking our biases. And so a term related to cultural bias is cultural relativism, and that's this idea that right and wrong can vary by culture. It could be something as simple as if it's ethical to eat meat, or how ethical it is to discipline your child with physical violence. And when making judgments about cultures, we should try to understand cultures through their own norms and values, which isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card, right? It's not necessarily saying anything goes, but it's worth taking the time to try to understand the cultural influences that might be leading to behaviors that may seem questionable and may end up still being questionable or detestable. Now, when two cultures interact, it's important to look at and understand the power dynamic between the groups, because often the cultures won't have equal power. You'll often have in-groups and out-groups. And in-groups are the dominant cultures in the area, and they often have power, at least cultural power, but they might have governmental power. They might have power through numbers. They might have economic power. There's a number of different ways that the in-group can have power, as opposed to the out-group, which is the culture outside of the dominant culture, and it may be marginalized, at least culturally. Right? And that doesn't mean they're completely powerless, completely subjugated or subordinated, but at least culturally, they don't have the power of being transmitted through everyday norms. Take, for example, there's a picture of the Amish people. Amish values aren't typically represented in a public school setting. And so Amish groups might need to do more to protect that culture or to pass that culture on to their next generation. And you often see that with minority cultures as outgroups. These are subcultures within a larger group that often, like I said, have to work to preserve their culture. Whether it's the Turkish American Society of Chicago, where a lot of Muslims meet and gather and have a community center, or the National Museum of Mexican Art in Pilsen. There's often institutions, both formal and informal, where people will pass down values and traditions and language, both material and non-material culture often. Right, so some of you or some of your friends may go to Polish school or spend time in significant cultural centers, or perhaps you decide to live in an ethnic neighborhood, a neighborhood where many people are the same ethnicity as you. Now, we'll explore this a little later in depth, and we can't ignore the amount of discrimination, both formal and informal, that has led to some of the segregation in Chicago, a lot of the segregation in Chicago. But also, there's at least a little bit of agency and self-selection in choosing to move next to people that are similar to you, that can help you assimilate into the main culture while still holding on at least a little bit of your other culture or a lot of it of your other culture. And so that in-group, out-group dynamic can change based on space. Here you can see a heat map of where people with Polish ancestry are in Chicago in the year 2000. And you can see in some areas there's going to be more Polish people than not. And typically that means the culture is going to spread more, the culture is going to perpetuate more and continue on into the next generation, much more likely in a place like Archer Heights with 38.5% Polish population, compared to a place like Mount Prospect with 16.3% Polish ancestry. But of course, all of these pale in comparison to if you just were still living in Poland, where Polish values would be passed down. But even what are Polish values and Polish culture, both material and non-material, that's going to change over time. And what's passed down as Polish culture in America in a few generations might be a little bit or a lot of bit different than Polish culture in Poland. And so that's all the notes for today. Make sure you've either taken notes and you submit a picture of them, write a summary or reflection that's at least 5 sentences long, or record a 45-second audio or video reflection. But whatever you decide to do, make sure you submit it to Cultural Interaction Vocab on Schoology.